Get ready for a white-knuckle journey through one of the most intense movies of our time. Welcome to Benjamin Recaps, where we break down the best of the best. Today, we're taking on The Intruder. Scott is a prosperous young marketer from San Francisco. It's his birthday, and many of his friends have come to celebrate. Following the party, Scott's wife, Annie, expresses a desire for a home away from the city, and Scott is willing to look into options to make his wife happy. The following day, the couple travels to Napa Valley to look at a house they saw advertised for sale. They arrive at a large yard in an old house. Annie's expressions revealed that she likes the house. Annie has stated that she intends to raise her children here in the future. When they arrive at the house, Scott and Annie look for the property's owner, but he is nowhere to be found. So the couple walks around the back of the house, where Annie notices a deer. A man with a gun appears and shoots the deer right in front of Scott and Annie, much to her surprise. This man turns out to be Charlie, the house's owner. Charlie eventually shows Scott and Annie around the house. He claims to have lived in the house for many years, possibly since his great-grandfather's time. Charlie keeps staring at Annie, and it's clear that this man is drawn to her. Charlie's wife recently died of cancer, and he is moving to Florida to live with his daughter, which is why he is selling the house. Charlie clearly loves this house despite having to sell it based on the words he has expressed. Scott makes an offer, but Charlie reveals that it is less than his asking price. Charlie changes his mind and agrees to give Scott and Annie the house just as they are about to leave. Annie is overjoyed when Scott buys the house. Charlie hands over the house keys and bids them farewell before departing for Florida to meet his daughter. Scott and Annie invite their friend Mike and his girlfriend to dinner the following day. Mike goes outside to take a leak while smoking while the four of them are having a good time. Mike had the strangest feeling that someone was watching him from afar. Mike walks back to the house, tossing his cigarette butt out into the trees. The next morning, Mike is irritated to discover that a cigarette burn has ruined the seats of his luxury car. Scott receives a call from Annie while at work, stating that Charlie is in their yard and is busy mowing the lawn. Annie inquires as to Charlie's whereabouts. He explains that because he dislikes seeing an untidy garden, he decided to mow the grass himself. Charlie also claims to be staying in a nearby hotel while awaiting his move to Florida. Annie takes pity on him and invites him to Thanksgiving dinner because he appears lonely. Charlie arrives on Thanksgiving Day with a cake and a lot of enthusiasm. Scott shows Charlie the renovations he did while at the house, and Charlie is displeased to see that Scott has replaced an old painting in the living room. Mike and his girlfriend join them for dinner, and they all have a good time until Mike starts telling Scott that the entire house needs to be renovated. He claims the house is too old and out of date, and he even proposes demolishing parts of it and replacing them with a modern design. Charlie becomes enraged upon hearing this, despite the fact that the house is no longer his. Mike is smoking outside when he is approached by Charlie, who expresses his dislike for him smoking in the yard. Later, Mike is certain that Charlie was the one who stuck the cigarette butt in the seat of his luxury car, but Annie is skeptical. Scott and Mike use flashlights to search for Charlie that night. They notice a car parked nearby and believe it is Charlie's. But the car drives away, and Mike is convinced that Charlie is obsessed with his house and refuses to sell it. Scott has burglar detectors installed in his home the next day. While the workers are putting sensors in a tree, Charlie storms in, yelling angrily that he does not want anyone destroying the trees. Scott claims that he is installing burglar detectors because someone was there the night before. Charlie explains that they were just high school students having a good time in the woods. Scott is awakened by a noise at night. The burglar light then indicates that someone is approaching the house. Scott immediately runs outside with a baseball bat, but Charlie was correct. High school students have gathered in the nearby woods, but Scott is unaware that Charlie is hiding among the trees in the dark, staring at him. Scott is irritated to see Charlie again. When Scott and Annie return home with a Christmas tree, Charlie appears to be bothering them, and Scott can't take it any longer. However, Charlie graciously shows them some Christmas ornaments he had stored in the warehouse for them to use. Scott later asks Annie not to let Charlie in again, but Annie is convinced that Charlie is a good man who only wants to help them. Meanwhile, Scott begins to develop feelings for his hot boss, and the two of them go to a bar for a drink. Charlie returns to the house with a bottle of wine for Annie. Charlie offers to help put up the Christmas decorations because Scott is too busy working to apologize for causing a commotion earlier. Annie and Charlie converse while drinking the wine Charlie brought. Annie is then disappointed when she receives a text from Scott stating that he will be arriving home late. She believes Scott is with another woman. Meanwhile, Scott's manager is flirting with and seducing him. Scott eventually decides to return home. Scott is surprised to discover an empty wine bottle on the table, and he wonders how Annie managed to put up all of the Christmas decorations by herself. After an argument, Annie is now sleeping alone in her bedroom. Scott is sleeping on the sofa that night. Scott is awakened by the sound of heavy rain. He believes he heard something or someone in the house, but it turns out to be nothing. Annie eventually approaches him and apologizes. Charlie is watching them from inside the house as they kiss and make up. Scott meets a man who lives not far from his house without their knowledge. The man warns Scott to be cautious around Charlie as he sees it. Charlie's wife died in that house, and it was later revealed that she committed suicide by shooting a rifle into her mouth. Scott and Annie investigate the room where Charlie's wife used to be, and they discover blood streaks on the wall. Scott goes to the Royal Hotel that night to look for Charlie. While pretending to be nice to Charlie, he tells him to stay away from his wife and home. Charlie is initially enraged that Scott has publicly humiliated him. The next day, Scott goes for a jog while listening to music, but he is hit by a speeding vehicle and is taken to the hospital. Scott is required to remain in the hospital until his test results are received, which means Annie will be alone at home that night. Scott suspects Charlie was the one who hit him with the car, so he calls Mike and asks him to look into Charlie's background. Annie is enjoying a relaxing bath at home alone at night when the doorbell rings. It turns out that Charlie has returned to see her. He pays her another visit, this time pretending to be sorry for what happened to Scott and bringing her a pizza. Annie feels bad when he is about to leave and invites him in so they can eat the pizza together. Meanwhile, Mike learns a lot about Charlie at the hospital. Charlie appears to be lying about his plans to visit Florida. He had to sell the house because he had become deeply in debt. Scott requests that Mike check on Annie because she is alone, and when Mike arrives at the house, he is surprised to see Charlie conversing with Annie. Charlie notices him peering at them from a distance and pursues him. Charlie informs Annie that the high school students have returned and that he intends to chase them away. He chases Mike down with an axe. He catches up and plunges the axe into Mike's chest, killing him instantly. Back at the house, Annie is appealing to him, and Charlie can't stop himself from touching her. However, he departs and returns the next day to spy on Annie in the shower. It is clear now that he had such easy access to the house. Finally, Scott returns home, enraged that Charlie is still in his yard. Scott becomes terrified when Annie informs him that Mike never came to check on her. Scott searches for him for days but can't find him. He finds the contact information for Charlie's daughter Cassidy, who is supposedly in Florida, with the help of his coworkers. Cassidy refuses to speak when Scott calls to inquire about her father. Charlie's presence at Annie's house one day surprises her. Charlie says he wanted to talk to her alone, but Annie becomes scared and asks him to leave. When he does, Annie locks all of the house's doors and windows, but she hears something from behind a cupboard. She is surprised to discover a secret door behind this cupboard, through which she falls down to a secret room. She discovers a bed, kitchen utensils, and clothing in this room, as if someone has been living down here for some time. A long corridor connects this room to the hut in her yard. Unfortunately, Charlie discovers Annie's whereabouts and follows her down the narrow corridor. Annie opens the wrong door and discovers Mike's body in the refrigerator. Annie quickly dials Scott's number, but Charlie follows her and assaults her. Charlie hits her until she collapses. Meanwhile, Cassidy calls Scott and tells him that her mother did not commit suicide, but was murdered by her father. Cassidy had to disguise herself in order to flee and avoid Charlie. Scott realizes right away that his wife is in danger and rushes back home. Meanwhile, Charlie is about to assault Annie on the bed, but Scott arrives just in time to stop him. When Scott tries to enter the room, he is attacked by Charlie, who severely beats him. Scott and Charlie spar until Scott falls from the second floor. Charlie pursues Annie, who was hiding in the room, once more. The two of them fight until Scott manages to beat Charlie several times. Annie stabs Charlie in the back with a knife. He does, however, manage to escape into his secret room and obtain a rifle. From here on out, it's a game of hide and seek as Charlie fires at the house's corners, intending to kill the hiding couple. Scott and Annie are hiding behind the bedroom door, where Charlie can shoot them at any time. Scott appears from behind the door and hits Charlie in the face with a baseball bat when Charlie finally enters the room. Charlie is dying, and Scott does not want Charlie to continue terrorizing his family. As Scott shoots Charlie in the head, Annie calls the cops and reports that her husband has just shot an intruder. The film ends here. That's it for The Intruder. I hope you enjoyed the ride. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more movie recaps. Let me know your thoughts on the film in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Benjamin, and this has been Benjamin Recaps.